Now, pay your attention, please. Now we have the award ceremony. It means a high moment in our symposium. I'm talking about the 2015 All European Academies Madame de Staël Prize for Cultural Values. I welcome all the participants in this special ceremony. First of all, my compliments to Mr. Carlos Moedas, European Commissioner for Science, Research and Innovation. It's a great pleasure to me to have you among us, and I hope to have many other opportunities to receive you in this Academy of Sciences. My best compliments and congratulations to Professor Dame Helen Wallace, Laureate of this year with the ALLEA Madame de Staël Prize. Professor Günter, please take the floor for your opening words.
Dear Commissioner Moedas, dear President Aires-Barros, esteemed and dear Dame Helen, dear delegates of the ALLEA Academies, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to welcome you here all tonight after today's symposium, which I hope was thought-provoking and stimulating for all who were in attendance. Today's symposium, tonight's award ceremony, could not have been possible without the generosity and efforts of our wonderful host, the Academy of Sciences of Lisbon, to whom we give our heartfelt thanks. I'm very pleased that tonight we shall celebrate the accomplishments of Professor Dame Helen Wallace, whose lifelong dedication to her subject has resulted in a formidable resume that remains unparalleled by many of her peers. Research, teaching, advising, and living in different parts of Europe for many years, a truly European scholar. First, allow me to make a few remarks concerning the context of tonight's event, the 16th ALLEA General Assembly. ALLEA brings together many of Europe's oldest bastions of knowledge, the academies, whose role in sustaining Europe's intellectual productivity remains vital, perhaps now more than ever in an age of rapid development in numerous sectors, both positive and negative developments, I would add, global societal challenges, increasingly advanced technological possibilities. For centuries, academies have provided an ideal space to research and to reflect, to collect data from many fields and combine them in an interdisciplinary way to fit today's challenges, a space to observe developments and help identify possible paths the future will take, and a space to carefully formulate conclusions and recommendations firmly grounded in scientific evidence and free of ideological, political, or commercial interests. The complexity and diversity of science and within our scientific institutions requires cooperation and integration in order to bring the Academy's work to true fruition, to really drive the work forward and give it impact. Through ALLEA, we have created an entity that reflects this belief in working together while upholding those essential values of academies which trace back to Plato's own ancient academy, the independent and pure search for the truth. Thus, through ALLEA, we strive for unity in our diversity, which is a maxim that is quite emblematic for Europe as well. All academies in Europe, regardless of their size, role in the national research system, structure or funding sources, are subject to the larger European framework conditions that directly and indirectly influence how academies perform their work. Therefore, ALLEA's goal is to help improve these conditions so that our members can continue to pursue their long-standing mission of conducting unbiased, independent research and scholarship that enriches and seeks to advance our society in many ways. Yet, it is important to remember that this research must be transmitted concretely so that we scientists can effectively contribute to this advancement of our society. In one of the ways we can maximize the impact of our research is by focusing on providing evidence-based advice, both to the society at large and to those institutions that are not only determine the framework conditions under which academies function, but also decide on policies that impact our civil society, our environment, and our economies. Creating the resources and infrastructure for providing scientific advice to policymakers and therewith eventually helping the society at large is therefore a highly relevant, important, and necessary task for ALLEA and the academies in Europe. To that end, we have to modify, adopt, and follow through on existing guidelines for providing scientific advice, such guidelines which, for example, my academy has provided several years ago, which is now also accepted by many others in Europe. Building a rapport with policymakers, setting up working groups of experts from different disciplines, and implementing mechanisms to assure transparency and independence from outside influences are all tasks that require guidelines in order to protect the Academy's independence and stature. We must make sure that our advice is both responsibly produced and effectively transmitted. However, we, the Academies in Europe, have in our work a responsibility to remember to consider Europe itself. Europe is not just a geographic region, political entity, or an economic area. It has ancient core values that must be preserved in order to remain intact. The understanding of Europe as an intellectual and cultural entity must not be weakened through economic crises or political skepticism. Europe has been built on a network of ideas, concepts, and common convictions. Values like individualism, pragmatism, pluralism, and diversity. So when trying to advance society via new research, technology, new doors, new markets, we should not neglect to consider the society's soul, Europe's soul, and its omnipresent yet intangible power to guide our questions, our considerations, and our conclusions. This is why we have created the All-European Academies Madame de Staël Prize for Cultural Values, which is awarded to scholars in order to reflect this belief and to honor the contribution of scholarly work towards maintaining, preserving, and developing these European values that remain constantly at risk. Because we are sometimes so busy researching how to practically fix the problems in Europe that we do not always appreciate the deep significance of research on Europe itself for helping our society. To put it simply, we cannot know where to go if we forget from where we come and who we are. Through the Madame de Staël Prize, ALLEA honors those scholars who have dedicated their extensive work to the European values, European identity, and the idea of European integration. Scholarly work that helps to foster this deeper discourse of where Europe can and should go. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to read the Laudatio for Professor Dame Helen Wallace. The author is a colleague and member of the jury for the Madame de Staël Prize. Unfortunately, he cannot be here, and so I'm reading what he gave as a Laudatio. It's Nicholas Mann from the British Society. He was former vice president of the British Academy and ALLEA. He's Professor Emeritus in Renaissance Studies and former Dean of the School of Advanced Study in the University of London. Dame Helen Wallace is the second recipient of the All European Academies Madame de Staël Prize for Cultural Values, a prize co-sponsored by the Mercator Foundation and awarded annually to eminent scholars whose work represents a significant contribution to the cultural and intellectual values of Europe and to the idea of European integration. That's the mission. The Europe that we live in today is a complex and constantly evolving community, very different from the war-torn geopolitical entity of 100 years ago. That it can have come so far is thanks to a polymorphous process of integration that continues as we speak, and that never ceases to present new challenges to all of those involved: statesmen, politicians, economists, the scholars, intellectuals and theoreticians, and the ordinary citizens of 28 nations who have to live with and to make sense of the grand design of the others. Madame de Staël, a citizen and protagonist of the Republic of Letters, believed firmly in the role of intellectuals in defending a European Union of ideas, which she called l'Empire de la Pensée, and might have difficulty in recognizing the need for the vast bureaucracy that today underpins the form that that union has taken. But she would certainly have wished to pay tribute to a scholar who has devoted her career to ensuring the most pragmatic way that the governance of Europe in all its present-day complexity continues to rest upon the human and cultural values that have inspired its most creative citizens from the very beginning. Dame Helen is indeed such a scholar and an eminent one. She is a fellow of the British Academy and since 2011 has been its Foreign Secretary and Vice President. She is an associate member of the Académies Royale des Sciences, des Lettres et des Beaux-Arts de Belgique, honorary chair of the Conseil universitaire européen pour l'Action Jean Monnet, and has been awarded honorary degrees by 4 British universities and the Institut d'études politiques de Paris. In addition, and more publicly, she has been honored in her own country by her appointment as Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George and Dame of the British Empire for her contribution to social science, and in France by her appointment as Chevalier de l'Ordre National du Mérite. But for all those who are concerned with contemporary politics and history, her public persona and name are inextricably linked with those of Europe. This can partly be explained by a volume which she edited and contributed to with her husband William, now Lord Wallace, as early as 1977, and which has very recently appeared in its 7th edition under the title Policy Making in the European Union. For the past 40 years, this has been judged the leading account of this subject and is without any doubt outstandingly the best continuously developing interpretation of the history and politics of European integration. It has influenced generations of students and scholars with its amalgam of expertise, comprehensive coverage, balance, and incisive analysis. What began as Dame Helen came to the end of her undergraduate degree in Literae Humaniores, that classical seedbed of so much that is fertile and innovative in British society. What began as a fascination with political events unrolling before her eyes was to become a lifelong passion. She left Oxford and the ancient European world for modern European studies in Bruges, and then embarked on a PhD in government at the University of Manchester. Even as General de Gaulle was uttering his second refusal to countenance the accession of the United Kingdom to the select body of 6 nations that then comprised the European community, she was writing her thesis on the domestic policy implications of the Labour government's application for membership of the EEC. With arguably greater historical and political prescience than the general, she continued to focus on British involvement in the community, and it is no exaggeration to say that she has remained deeply involved with and even helped to guide the expansion of Europe from the time of the UK's accession in 1973 to the richly diverse and complex organism that is the Union today. Her truly distinguished career has most unusually managed to bridge the potential gap between the intellectuals, the politicians, the ivory tower, and the real world, for she has moved between universities, notably Manchester, Sussex, the European University Institute in Florence, and the London School of Economics, and institutions closer to government, the Civil Service College, the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chatham House. In both domains, she has taught and led research, but always acted also as an advisor. Her teaching, usually to groups of students of diverse nationalities and often outside Britain, in the College of Europe, for instance, was innovative. She developed courses on how to negotiate in a European context when other people might have thought that that was an impossibility, and ran simulation exercises eagerly attended by both university students and civil servants. Among her ex-pupils, she counts 2 current prime ministers of EU countries, Finland and Denmark. Closer to home, she trained several generations of British civil servants in European affairs and wider international relations. After a year's secondment to the planning staff of the Foreign Commonwealth Office, she subsequently became director of the highly successful European program of Chatham House, which she ran for 7 years. Then, as Jean Monnet Professor at the University of Sussex, she developed the Sussex European Institute with a program to teach talented young people from Central and East European countries about the workings of the European Union in the aftermath of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Many of these young people returned to their own countries and were instrumental in their transition from Soviet dirigism to liberal market economies. Some of them are now elder statesmen. She had a similar galvanizing effect on several generations of young scholars as director of the United Kingdom's Economic and Social Research Council's One Europe of several research program, and during her 5-year directorship of the Robert Schuman Centre of the European University Institute in Florence. This highly influential teaching activity, affirmed and augmented by a prodigious output of publications, conference papers and lectures, has made her commitment to Europe and her unwavering scrutiny of every aspect of its development accessible to a much wider audience than is usual for academics. It has also left its traces clearly visible across a community of academics who specialize in European affairs. But more significant still, in her various advisory capacities, Dame Helen has been able to reach the ears of the practitioners, the politicians and lawmakers who, in the real world, are at the heart of the European machine and are always amenable to the opinions of the scholars in the ivory tower. She has, on numerous occasions, given advice or evidence on European matters to British parliamentary committees and was particularly involved in the early discussions in the 1980s, which in due course led to the formulation of the Single Market Programme. Outside Britain, she was for 5 years an active member of the Advisory Group for the Social Sciences for DG Research of the European Commission on the 6th Framework Programme. She was a member of the Sapir Group, a high-level group asked by the President of the European Commission to produce an agenda for a growing Europe, which was duly delivered in July 2003 and published the following year. From 2005 to 2009, she served as a member of the group of political analysis created to advise EC President Barroso. Concurrently, she was a member of the European Better Regulation Commission and a special advisor to Commissioner Olli Rehn, responsible for economic and monetary affairs. These appointments demonstrate the respect in which she is held with the Commission and the remarkable range of her competence. As further evidence of her international reach, one can mention her membership of the scientific advisory boards of such institutions as University of Siena, Universities of Bremen and Mannheim, Catholic University of Louvain, Austrian Institute of International Affairs, Ortega y Gasset Foundation in Madrid, and the European Cultural Foundation in Amsterdam. In all of this, Dame Helen, whose modesty is well known, would argue that any difference that her often pioneering efforts may have made to the evolution of the European Union has been the effect of collaboration and collegiality. It is no accident that many of her most notable publications bring together the writings of the very best theoreticians and practitioners to create volumes that are a catalyst for change. And that she has been able to assemble wholes which are much greater than the sum of their parts. That is one aspect of her skill, but it's only one. It's a characteristic of all her written work and of her modus operandi that she takes full account in her analysis of the development of Europe, of both internal and external forces, and that she maintains a balanced perspective upon them, recognizing that neither the study of ideas alone nor that a functionalist dynamics would provide a satisfactory account of, or design for, the process of integration. Instead of success of the European project must depend upon a full understanding of the dynamic interplay between the member states and the unique development of supranational laws and institutions envisioned by the Treaty of Rome. In addressing these issues with a remarkable blend of incisive analysis and true pragmatism, her studies of the divergences between the member states and their various degrees of bilateral relations or wider cooperation have achieved the status of classics and are a point of reference for all those concerned with European institutions, as are also her writings on regulation, the working of the Council of Ministers, and of the continuing and endlessly contentious process of enlargement. To say that Dame Helen has made a significant contribution to the idea of European integration is to understate the case. Her grasp of the political system of the members of the Union is such that she has been able to offer exceptional insights into the complexities attendant upon the process of integration, and has, through her advisory roles, been able to argue that the very diversity that is at the heart of European culture should not simply be set aside in the forging of new instruments, but should be honored and enshrined in the vision for the future. Her personal commitment to the European ideal, to the ideal of public service right across the Union, together with her scholarly integrity, ensure that her voice is heard, not just by the vast network of academics who work on European matters, but also by those scarcely less numerous who work in the Commission and the corridors of power in Brussels. But at the same time, those who know her well and have been taught by her or have been her colleagues know that she is always generous with her time and her advice, and that the shrewdness of her judgment and the acuity of her vision are tempered by a deep and compassionate awareness of human frailty and of the difficulties that can stand in the way of personal ideas and ambitions. She knows the importance of effective arguments, the heart dictating to the head, and the significance that such arguments can have in public debate. The future of Europe cannot depend upon them, but those responsible for it cannot afford to ignore them either. Surveying her world at the turn of the 19th century, under the shadow of an encroaching absolutism very different from that even of the worst fears of the opponents of Brussels 300 years later, Madame de Staël declared, "Les progrès des sciences rendent nécessaires les progrès de la morale, car en augmentant la puissance de l'homme, il faut fortifier le frein qui l'empêche d'en abuser." Scientific progress makes moral progress as necessity. For if man's power is increased, the checks that remain and restrain him from abusing it must be strengthened. The new narrative for Europe, announced by EC President Barroso 2 years ago, aims to give a voice to the artistic, cultural, scientific and intellectual communities to articulate what Europe stands for today and tomorrow. This is where academies can play their role. In the Europe of knowledge, where knowledge is understood not simply as scientific progress, but as encompassing the whole panoply of human intellectual endeavor embraced by the member academies of ALLEA. Dame Helen's entire career has been devoted to the creation of this new Europe and has contributed signally not only to what in the broad sense one might call the scientific understanding of it, but also by the integrity, perspicacy, and sheer humanity of her work to the moral dimension. It was in the spirit of the new narrative that ALLEA joined hands with the Mercator Foundation to create the Madame de Staël Prize. It is in the spirit of Madame de Staël that ALLEA should now honor Dame Helen Wallace by presenting to her the prize for 2015. That's the Laudatio. And on this note, I would now like to welcome Commissioner Carlos Moedas, to whom I will turn over the floor in just a few moments. Commissioner Moedas is an alumnus of the Instituto Superior Técnico here in Lisbon, where he studied civil engineering. His success in politics reflects his extensive experience in the fields of investment banking and economics combined with his scientific background. Between 2010 and 2014, Commissioner Moedas served as senior economic advisor of the Portuguese Social Democratic Party, member of the Portuguese Parliament, Secretary of State to the Prime Minister of Portugal. Since autumn 2014, he has served as the European Commissioner for Research, Science and Innovation in the new Commission under President Jean-Claude Juncker. We are very honored that he will be presenting our award to Dame Helen tonight. Thank you for coming home to Portugal. Please.